My name is Tina, and I am 26 years old. I have been sharing a two-bedroom apartment with my roommate Jess, who is 25, for the past year and a half. We weren't friends before moving in together, just connected through a mutual acquaintance when we both needed housing. The arrangement worked well initially. We were both busy with our own lives, but respectful of shared spaces and each other's boundaries. I work in healthcare, which means long shifts, often overnight, and sometimes I'll be gone for 12, 16 hours at a time. Jess works a standard 9-5 marketing job, so our schedules rarely aligned, which was actually perfect for sharing a small apartment. We weren't constantly fighting over the bathroom or kitchen, and we each had plenty of alone time. About 3 months ago, I started noticing small things in our apartment that felt off. Food I was certain I had bought would be missing from the fridge. The living room would be slightly messier than I'd left it. The shower would be wet when I got home, even though Jess should have been at work hours earlier. I initially chalked it up to my exhaustion from work, thinking maybe I was misremembering things. Then I started finding men's items around the apartment. A razor in the bathroom that wasn't mine, a hoodie thrown over the couch that was definitely too large for Jess. Once, I even found a pair of men's sneakers by the door. When I asked Jess about these things, she'd always have an explanation ready. "Oh, my brother stopped by. That's just my friend's jacket he forgot when we were studying. Those are shoes I bought for my dad's birthday. I'm keeping them here until I visit him." I had no reason not to believe her, so I accepted these explanations without much thought. After all, she was allowed to have visitors. But about 6 weeks ago, I came home early from a shift. I was supposed to work until 8 a.m., but we were unexpectedly overstaffed, so I got to leave at 4 a.m. instead. I walked into our apartment as quietly as possible, not wanting to wake Jess, when I heard the shower running. As I set my bags down, a guy I'd never seen before walked out of the bathroom wearing nothing but a towel. He looked just as shocked to see me as I was to see him. We both froze for a moment before he mumbled something about being Jess's boyfriend and hurried back to her bedroom. I was confused and a little annoyed, but I figured he was just staying over, which wouldn't be a big deal occasionally. Our lease didn't prohibit overnight guests, and I had my boyfriend stay over sometimes too, though I always gave Jess a heads up beforehand. That evening, when we were both home, I casually mentioned meeting her boyfriend. "So, I met Mark this morning," I said. She looked startled for a second, then composed herself. "Oh yeah, he stayed over last night. Sorry I didn't mention it." "No problem," I replied. "Just give me a heads up next time." It was a bit of a surprise to find a half-naked stranger in our apartment at 4 a.m. She laughed it off and agreed. But over the next few weeks, I realized Mark wasn't just staying over occasionally. He was there every single day. When I'd leave for a night shift, he'd be there. When I'd return in the morning, he'd be there. His toiletries were in our bathroom. His food was in our fridge. His laptop was set up on our dining table. I finally confronted Jess about it. "Has Mark moved in with us?" I asked directly. She looked uncomfortable, but tried to play it off. "Of course not. He just stays over a lot." "Jess, his stuff is everywhere. I haven't seen him leave in weeks." She sighed and finally admitted it. "Okay, so he's been staying here. His lease ended 2 months ago and he was having trouble finding a new place. It's just temporary until he finds something." 2 months ago, I repeated, stunned. "He's been living here for 2 months and you didn't think to ask me about it or even tell me?" "I didn't think you'd notice, honestly," she replied. "You're barely here with your work schedule, and when you are home, you're usually in your room. Plus, he's really quiet and clean." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She deliberately hid the fact that she had moved someone into our home because she thought I wouldn't notice? "That's not the point," I told her. "This is my home too. I pay half the rent and utilities. You can't just move someone in without discussing it with me first." "He doesn't really use much," she argued, "and he's been chipping in for groceries." "Has he been chipping in for rent, for utilities?" I asked. She avoided my eyes. "Well, no, but..." "So, I've been subsidizing your boyfriend's living situation for 2 months without even knowing it?" The conversation went in circles, with Jess downplaying the situation and me getting increasingly frustrated. Finally, we agreed that Mark would contribute to rent and utilities if he was going to continue staying with us, and that they would find their own place within 30 days. I thought that would be the end of it, but things only got worse. Mark seemed to resent me for making him pay rent. He started leaving messes in the common areas, something he apparently hadn't done before when they were trying to hide his presence. He used my things without asking, from my expensive coffee to my PlayStation. Once, I even found him wearing my bathrobe because it was just hanging there. The final straw came when I returned home from a particularly exhausting 16-hour shift to find that someone had eaten the meal I had prepared specifically for my return. I had labeled it clearly with my name and the date, but the container was empty in the sink. When I confronted them, Mark shrugged and said, "I didn't think you'd mind, it's just food." It wasn't just food to me, it was the meal I had carefully prepared during my limited free time so I wouldn't have to cook after a grueling shift. It represented the small amount of control I had over my life while working a demanding job, and they had taken even that from me. I couldn't take it anymore. The next day, while both Jess and Mark were at work, I called our landlord. Our lease was in both my and Jess's names, but it clearly stated that no additional occupants were allowed without prior approval and an amendment to the lease. I explained the situation, and the landlord was understandably upset. He told me that having an unauthorized tenant was grounds for eviction for both of us. After some discussion, we came to an agreement. Since I had reported the violation and had been unaware of it, I could stay if I wished. Jess, however, would need to leave. The landlord gave me permission to change the locks as long as I gave Jess reasonable time to collect her belongings. I changed the locks that same day and packed up what I could identify as Mark's belongings, placing them in storage containers outside the door. Then I sent Jess a text explaining what had happened and that she had 3 days to coordinate with me to collect her things, as per our local tenant laws. The response was immediate and explosive. Jess called me, screaming that I had no right to kick her out, that I was heartless, that she and Mark had nowhere to go. She threatened legal action. She said I was overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Mark sent threatening messages saying I'd regret this. I stood my ground. I reminded her that she had violated our lease and my trust by moving someone in without my knowledge or consent, and that person had proceeded to disrespect my space and belongings. I told her I had already spoken with the landlord and he supported my decision. I reiterated that she had 3 days to collect her things and I would be present to ensure she only took what belonged to her. She eventually did come to collect her belongings, bringing Mark and 2 other friends as witnesses. The entire time, she alternated between crying about how I was ruining her life and angrily muttering that I was being ridiculous over such a small thing. After they left, the mutual friend who had connected us in the first place reached out to tell me I had been unnecessarily harsh. He said I should have given Jess more time to find a new place, that changing the locks was extreme, and that everyone makes mistakes. He said several people in our extended social circle think I'm the jerk in this situation. Now, 2 weeks later, I'm still getting messages from people telling me I overreacted. Jess has apparently been telling everyone that I evicted her without warning because I suddenly decided I didn't want her boyfriend around. She's conveniently leaving out the part where she secretly moved him in for 2 months and he helped himself to my food and belongings. I admit that changing the locks while they were out was probably dramatic, but I felt I had no other options. Jess had already shown she had no respect for my boundaries, and I was genuinely concerned they might damage my belongings or refuse to leave if given advance notice.